bring this meeting of the Budget Committee to order. We'll start with roll call. Mr. Perez-Urdia.
Mr. Perez-Urdia.
Cameron.
John Waddington.
Pete Peterson.
Meg Zalatow. Suzanne France.
Felix Rivera.
Forrest Dunbar. And my co-chair, Ms. Quinn Davidson, will be back shortly. So let's dive right in and start talking about the Academy and Vanguard project. Who is going to be discussing that?
Go ahead.
Come forward. If you come forward and please identify yourself for the record.
Mr. Chair,
Oh, yes.
Crystal Kennedy online.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. I apologize.
Thanks.
Kent Colhase, Director of PM&E.
Okay. Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could we get, I don't know if we have slides or what we have, but just a brief overview of the project and some of the policy decisions that we have to make on this?
Sure. So, brief overview of the project, and Mr. Falsey will pull up some slides that we have that show some of the possible scenarios. The state is working on their O'Malley to Diamond project. They are slated for, and by the way, a representative of DOT is here today if there are questions of them, their project manager for that project. They're slated to get funding in 2021, proceed to construction in 2022, and complete construction, I believe, in 2023. The municipality's project is right now currently designed to about 65%. The current cost estimates for that project, for our project, are in the range of $22 to $25 million. And a significant portion of that is right-of-way acquisition. There's two alignments we're working on, an alignment that has an S-curve that runs slightly to the north, runs through the Christian Health Fellowship building, and another building we would acquire two properties. The estimate is in the range of $25 million for the total project, including right-of-way acquisition. When we got that most recent cost, it caught the attention of folks within the administration. We've had some discussions with assembly members who represent the adjacent districts. There are two districts that are split by the project. And so we're here to answer questions that you may have about the project and the costs.
Mr. Waddington, you're in queue.
No, I just want to highlight that Sean Bassett was here, but he'd already mentioned. I know Sean wanted to sit up here. We have an empty seat. But you better do that. Sure.
I'm sorry, who's that? You're from DOT?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Okay, any further questions?
Well, maybe just to practice the discussion. So the discussion here is, what do we do? I mean, we had talked 8 million, I heard 3 years ago, then went up to 10, then to 14, now it's doubled. So that's important. But our question here is, what do we do if there's going to bond? Is that right?
Yes, so our typical bond program right now is in the range of $35 million, I guess, plus or minus. So this would be a significant chunk of the bond package for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, depending on how much we put in each bond package, with a resulting impact to other projects on the list. So there are options on the table, which may or may not be palatable. One would be to proceed with either of the alignments. They're close in cost. The R&M alignment, the south alignment, may be slightly cheaper, a few million dollars cheaper. Another option would be for the city not to proceed with the project, and there would be ramifications for that in the way of increased traffic and congestion in that neighborhood, which is not designed or constructed right now to handle $5,000 or $10,000 or $12,000 more cars a day.
So I'm going to ask a question that I have Felix in the queue. And it's two sort of interrelated questions. So if we do not do this, will the state nevertheless go ahead with their project? This is a question for you.
Sure. So the state makes a commitment to the federal government to finish off a project that it starts. So the state's project is a $100 million project.
How much of it have you spent so far?
So initially, what we do is we get design funding through FHWA, and as of right now, we've got about $7 million on the books. But in the STIP, the statewide transportation improvement program, we've got all, 140 million, including right-of-way acquisition costs shown in those as projected obligations in future years. We've already got the right-of-way funding allocated, which is on top of the design funding, another $4 or $5 million. We've started acquisition of our right-of-way about 3 or 4 months ago.
So it's a $100 million project.
Yes, sir.
Wow.
And that brings me, Mr. Chair, now that I'm finished with the audiovisual issues. And the reason I think we're having this conversation is that we felt an obligation to daylight for the assembly of this project was more expensive than we initially understood it to be when we were having these conversations 2 years ago. So it is showing up in our ARCSA bond now as a very chunky right-of-way acquisition, and it will show up for the next several years if we continue the path we're on. For folks who aren't intimately familiar with the project, it's all occasioned by the fact that the state is working on the highway. So this is Scooter Avenue. If you're coming south, you can get off of Scooter Avenue south of Diamond, north of O'Malley. This project, the state project, is to lift to the highway, so now you can drive continuously from Scooter through to Academy. I asked project management and engineering if they could model out what happens if we do nothing, and then what's supposed to happen when we do our follow-on project. This is the do nothing slide. And the do nothing slide is of concern to the community in the affected area and to the municipality, because if we do nothing, then the traffic volumes on these streets become untenable, and we actually start to see sort of failures at the light onto Abbott. So that's getting to Assemblymember Whittleton's question: what do we do about that? And so keep on the path that we're on, and it's expensive, and know that it kind of blocks out a lot of other arts and projects for the next few years, so we can figure out something else. But
So my follow-up question is, if we do not do this, and I am extremely resistant to putting this on the bond, very finite bond funds, and there are dozens of things I think that would be a better use of this money. If we don't do this, can you go do what you always used to do, and which the state, because this is a state project, and get state capital grants and pay for the rest of this?
That has not been asked of the department. Our project is a federally funded project. So, if a local jurisdiction wants to approach our planning department and try to move that direction, they're more than welcome to. Academy and Scooter are both municipality of Anchorage roads.
Sure.
There are certainly needs within the state that for state bonding and other things for other state roads outside of the municipality.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Oh, hold on.
Where's
sorry.
Scooter on this?
That's pretty far to the north.
That's the top of the page.
Yeah. So
How's that come into the
They're
comment?
talking about Scooter.
Scooter,
He's
not
hearing
Tutor.
tutor.
Scooter. Sorry. Mr. Rivera, then Ms. Salatel, and then is there anybody else? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Falsey answered a little bit of the first question I had, which is why we're here in the first place. To give a little bit more context, I think a big part of the reason why, particularly the Community Council, which I believe the president of the Community Council is here, as well as some other officers of the Community Council, that they're really pushing for this project to be done, is that we learned the hard way when 76th and Lore, when that underpass went through, that there are a lot of potential ramifications for the neighborhood in terms of traffic and impacts. So the Community Council is feels pretty strongly that we must mitigate those impacts, and if the state is not going to pay for it, then the Community Council put it first in their CIP for us to pay for this project. And simply not doing anything, as we can see here, isn't the solution. So the policy question for us then is, do we ask the state to pay for it, or do we decide to put it on our bonds and we pay for it?
I'm sorry, Ms. Salatel.
Thank you. And actually, I have a follow-up question to Mr. Rivera. He says it's currently listed on the CIP. I was wondering if it had been listed previously, this intersection or any other capital improvement projects in this area, or is this just directly related to this state project?
So I've been with the department for a few years. I'm not aware that it was listed separately until it was driven by the Scooter 92nd project, the Seward Highway project.
And I have one other question. where's AMAT's policy been in the discussion of this? And when I asked that question, I asked it with some limited understanding of AMAT. So has it come before the AMAT's policy committee? And has there been a discussion in there? If so, what? And I guess it's stop there.
So I'll provide some general understanding. We asked that question this morning in response to your email query. It was submitted as an AMATS project in the recent past. It ranked, I believe, 17th on the list. It didn't rank highly. It's not funded for construction through AMATS. If we were to propose it as an AMATS project now, it would be an amendment, a major amendment to the TIP, and it would result in some other projects being realigned if it were ranked more highly.
Mr. Schutte, do you have additional?
Can I just supplement that? Chris Schutte, Director of Economic Community Development. As most of you are familiar, there's two major products in the AMATS world. There's the TIP, which is short-term project list, and then there's the MTP. Academy Vanguard's been in it's called the 90-second/Academy extension. It's been in the MTP, the 2035 MTP since about 2011. But as Mr. Clay has indicated, it's very low. It's a very low ranking project. So it has been on the long-term radar in the AMATS world, but as far as advancing it to the level of putting it in the TIP to fund, it has not.
No. Are we talking about the same thing? Are you talking about this, or are you talking about the federal project that is funded?
Through the chair, the portion we're discussing.
Okay. So
the Muni project.
And if I may, so the long history of this project, the federal project started back in the early 2000s with the initiation of the environmental document, which included coordination heavily with a lot of stakeholders, including the municipality, and coming in line with the long-range transportation plan. So, the environmental document, which basically sets the preferred alternative, which includes the cross connection of Scooter and Academy in that interchange, was set back in the early 2000s. This is merely, the federal project, the state's project, is merely the third phase, right? We did all the way Tudor to Dowling, and then Dowling to Diamond, and so now this is the next phase in that,
got to complete the grid.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm sorry, who was next on the list?
I know it was.
Mr. Constant.
It was along the lines of what was just put forward, that I saw a document today that showed this project began in 2001 to 2004. And so I just wanted to raise that up, that I was surprised because I've been hearing about it since 2015. I had no idea it was that old, that long on the books. I'm surprised.
Mr. Weddleton.
I'll try to show restraint. The project has been on the books and thought about probably for decades, and described as Seward Highway improvement, Dowling to somewhere probably. Okay, and somehow people like us and people who don't read these things are supposed to extrapolate from that it would be this tunnel underneath that will take away a significant portion of the soccer fields there, that it will dump 14,000 cars a day on the neighborhood that's already suffering from cut-through traffic, and that it will impose on the city a $25 million project. Somehow from Seward Highway improvements down into whatever, O'Malley, you're supposed to extrapolate that. So the public process, they did it. They came out, they said, look, Seward Highway improvements. And somehow we're supposed to see this. This project, 92nd to Academy, the whole thing, ranks low in AMATS because it's simply not needed. 20 years ago, it may have been needed. But we did the only thing you can really do to solve traffic problems in this world, and that's change the way you use your land. What's where? We built Tacotna. It was built. Totally changed the need for the congestion at Diamond and Old Seward Highway. Totally changed it. Used to get followed up, simply does not now. So this is unneeded. There's also a new plan to do a diverging diamond, is that what you call it? Underneath at Seward Highway, Diamond, and also at O'Malley, which is expected to double the capacity of those intersections. So with that new technique, with something that doesn't need this already, we're pretty much good. We don't need this. we're told, well, we have to complete this plan. It's gone through FHWA, it's approved, we're committed, and they have to pay $100 million, or I think this is 30 for this component. Is that more correct, or is this $100 million for this component?
So to date, as far as this project goes, including right-of-way and design, we're probably in that 50 million.
But is that for this component, or it's the whole?
That is for this section from O'Malley to Dunn.
Okay, so it's not, and so I've heard it's 30 million for the, but roughly, it's not the 100 million.
I've got 15 million, maybe 15 to 20 million on the books
Okay.
between design and right-of-way.
Okay, so the 100 million is for that whole stretch. I don't know if it was the case 20 years ago, but now my understanding is when you bring a project to the feds, you need to have a complete project. You can't do a piece of it. And what we've got here is the state went with an incomplete project. It didn't connect that, make that connection. So I would say this is not a proper project. And if we went to FHWA and said, I think you've got a problem here, maybe they would see that this should not be done. The state part is poorly done.
Yeah, I'll just comment to that. Just because we spent $15 million doesn't mean we have to spend the next $100 million, right? I mean, there are plenty of projects where we've spent a lot of money, like Cabada, for example. Realize this is a terrible idea. We're not going to spend the next billion. Anyway, Austin?
Yeah. Thanks, Mr. Dunbar. So I was going to ask why it didn't rank high on AMATs. John gave some insight. I assume that some of you might have a different opinion about that, or do you agree with what John said?
Through the chair, I haven't looked into it enough to know the reason
Okay.
for the ranking or ranking of AMAX.
But if we're being asked to elevate it, there's got to be some reason, though, despite its location here, there's a need to elevate it. Is it just because the state's doing their project? It's not really on its substantive merits on its own?
I think on the face of it, the reason right now would be because the state's doing their project and it would dump 12,000 and 15,000 cars a day onto Academy Vanguard.
But Mr. Wilson, you don't think that's true?
No, I think that's the case.
That is true.
Because the state insists on doing this improper project, an unneeded project.
Okay.
Dumps.
Got it.
They do 15 million, we got 25 we're facing now.
But so now that they're doing it, are we in a position where we sort of have to do? I guess I'm just trying to figure out what we should do.
It's $1 million question.
Yeah.
$5 million question.
Right, the $25 million question. Okay. You want to talk? Go for it, and then I'll do my other question.
Pete is next in the...
Okay, wait, can I ask a couple more questions, if that's okay? Where's Scooter? Because we keep talking about it, but
The other side.
I don't see it.
This side.
It used to be
Okay.
92nd, now Scooter next to Cat.
Got it. And is
Can you orient us a
Abbott?
little bit more? Because
Okay.
I don't even know where Scooter is.
Diamond Mall is
in
up
the
over
city,
here.
So,
O'Malley is down here.
It's the new exit that dumps you into the mall right there.
And Abbott is state-owned or city-owned?
Both.
This section of Abbott is city owned.
Okay. Okay, so the reason we think the city should pay for it is because Academy and Abbott are both city-owned. Is that why? In this area?
I don't know, through the chair, I don't know if I have an answer to that. The state built 92nd on the west side of the Seward Highway, which is city owned, so.
Okay, so the state is just not doing what it should do? Is that, you don't have to answer that, someone else can?
I think there's also an important part here, going back to the history of the project, which is when this was first envisioned years ago, there was an assumption made that the state would still roll in the dough,
Right.
and that they would be able to give us grants to finish paying for the rest of it. And so I think that was a poor assumption on our part.
Okay, well, it seems that we're continually in the position of picking up the pieces that the state left us. I know it's not your fault, but I think it'd be interesting to consider a state bond. Why wouldn't the state bond for this if it's something the state started? And so the total bond we have right now, the total road bond the municipality is proposing right now is what?
It's like 37.5 million.
And this is how much?
This
4?
next phase is 4 million right away.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, guys, for letting me know.
Pete?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I actually first heard about this project when I was in the legislature on the Transportation Committee in late 2010 or early 2011. And as far as the diverging diamond goes, we actually have proved that it does have twice the capacity of normal intersections because of the diverging diamond that was built at Muldoon and Glen Highway. Traffic used to be backed up all the way, to 15th or 20th Avenue during the rush hour, and that's no longer the case. And so it actually did what it was intended to do. So like John, I believe, is correct, there may not be a need for this at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Ms. Solitano.
Thank you. If the 14,000 additional cars come on to Academy, does that change that particular road's classification in terms of how we classify roads and trigger anything additionally for us in terms of traffic management beyond the construction project proposed?
So we were looking at the official streets and highways plans. It's classified right now as a minor arterial. So the construction, the design and construction of Academy Vanguard would be to that standard.
And I think, through the chair, I'm not sure the actual traffic volumes drive the classification. I work with the real experts. We can have a very low design road that gets a crush of traffic and it doesn't become a collector as a result of that. It becomes a road with too much traffic on it for its designation.
Okay, that might be highlighting another issue. Thank you.
Mr. Constant.
Thank you. I'm surprised John didn't pick up on this, but the reason it didn't score highly enough is because it doesn't move enough cars at peak traffic at this time. Right? That's how the scoring criteria work at AMATS at this time still, until scoring is fixed. Effectively, that's the AMATS criteria. You can battle all you want, but in the end, it almost always boils back down to it doesn't move enough cars at peak traffic time relative to all the other projects to fit in the highest priority. We're working on that. There's
On
an
changing that
incredible
standard,
amount of
yeah.
work. It's just not yet landed, and it should be soon.
Okay. Well, we've got a lot of other topics today. This is, let's see, we're still pretty early in the bond process.
Right. Sure. If we don't have sort of.
Oh, I'm sorry. I promised
yes.
someone in the public. Who would like to speak to this? Yeah, please, sir. If you could identify yourself for the record.
I will. I'm going to sit with my name is Dave Piper, and I work right on that corner of Academy Drive and Vanguard. I'm an associate director with Christian Health Associates, and I'm here today with our executive director, Brian Green, and one of our board members, Randy Walker. I want to thank this assembly for the work that you do. I've sat in a number of meetings, and you have some topics coming up in this agenda that are very close to my heart. I've watched you wrestle with many of these issues and budgets, and I appreciate the difficulty that you face in making these decisions. The dates connected to this project have bounced around, and I became familiar with this project when I came to work with Christian Health Associates in 2011, which actually matches the first information available on the website connected to this project. I brought along a bunch of little handouts for myself to jar my memory, but in this existing condition program that's laid out in the website, it shows a number of different alternatives to making the traffic flow in response to what was going to happen at the Stewart Highway and moving traffic down Academy Drive. Just 2 years later in this process, after we had attended several meetings and really didn't want to see our business, our service to the community be forced to move. We learned in 2013 that the preferred route that had resulted from all the studies that CRW and others had done actually did run through our property. And so what that did is it keyed us into a different kind of mindset. We could no longer think about if this project was going to happen, but we had to plan for when it happened. And so, in our naivete, we went out and we located a piece of property. We engaged some folks that helped us do a big study and helped us with a grant to decide what size building would be appropriate for our move to a new facility. And we actually went to the state and asked them for $11 million to help us do this because they were impacting us by the work they were doing down at the Seward Highway. Well, we didn't get much traction with our asking for that big money, and that's probably appropriate. But what it did do is it forced us to continue looking for an alternative site because it was no longer a question of if this was going to happen, but when it was going to happen. And so to support the work that we do in this community, we felt obligated to look for an alternative site. And so over the last couple of years, we've been watching the proverbial funding football on this. We pushed down the road, kicked down the road, and we thought it was going to happen in 2018. But some of you were part of the group that decided not to fund acquisition dollars in 2018, and they put it back in the bond for 2019. And so we thought, okay, well, we have to have a building. We have to find a building to move to. And so we worked hard to locate a building that we could move to. And so we have an owner of a building that is kind of queued up and waiting for us to say, yes, we want to buy your building, but we have to have the funds from this acquisition to help us do that. So we've moved from a very strange place of not wanting to have to move, not wanting to advocate for that move, to a place where we feel like it's not a matter of if this is going to happen, but when. And we're at a place where we need some decisions to be able to move forward and purchase an alternative property, because we believe, we've been told to believe, that this is not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when. And if it just keeps kicking it down the road, we're left in a place of indecision and inability to actually provide for our business, which is caring for people in this community in a number of different ways. So I would ask you to really consider the benefits of investing in this corner sooner than later. We need your help to help us plan for our work, and I believe that will help the whole community because we try to do a really good job of helping in the community. Mr. Weddleton has been helpful in helping us figure out how to talk with the community council. The community council is involved in this project, and they rank it high. So we've had every indication that this was supposed to move forward, and we've acted in good faith to do our part. And we would appreciate it if the city would do its part and follow through with the acquisition process. So, and I would be delighted to answer any questions that you might have.
I guess my one question is, have you spoken with your state legislators at all about getting a state capital grant to finish this and to buy you out as well? Because this is ultimately a state project.
Well, so all the information we have been given to date is that this is a municipal project.
Yeah.
So
That's fair.
We have not.
Who are your state legislators?
We were given an offer by the community to buy the property. So we
I'm
were
sorry,
never,
could you identify yourself?
I'm Brandon Walker. I'm one of the board members for CHA, the organization that Dave represents. So we were actually given an offer to buy the property, and that offer was retracted, I don't know, 2-3 months ago. So we were never told that we needed to go to the state and ask for money. So
yeah,
that wasn't.
Not saying you made a mistake.
So,
I'm just saying
yeah.
that might be another good avenue to discuss with whoever your state house rep and your state senator is. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, Brandon, I was going to ask you a question separate from your service on this board, but actually hearkening back to your service on planning and zoning. And my question, consistently, we face as a municipality a challenge of our friends at DOT working in a timeline and a framing of projects that doesn't really pay close attention to land uses nearby, although they say they do. my friends work hard to try, it can be pretty hard. And so I think the conflict that we're hearing a lot about is that this isn't in the scale that's reasonable to the neighborhood, and that we're going to totally transform a neighborhood here from a residential quiet place to a car zone. So my question for you, wearing it's not the hat of your board service, but kind of someone who understands pretty broadly land use, what are your thoughts on this project in that context?
Well, it's always been my opinion that that route, for the most part, avoids most of the conflicting residential uses, with the exception of that stretch where it backs up against the trailer park. And if one were to compare it with 72nd Lower Road, where a very similar design was implemented in the last several years, the residential uses surrounding that project are far more intensive than the residential uses surrounding this project. And in fact, it diverts over to Vanguard and skips that Patriot Circle and Courage area there. So to a large degree, I think it avoids the conflicting uses and is pushed over into those industrial uses to the west. So I mean, I don't see the conflicts that Mr. Weddleton does, but I mean, that's not to say that there isn't something we could address that.
Mr. Weldon, yeah.
I agree with Brandon. Without this project, it's a crisis for the neighborhood. This crisis draws the bulk of the traffic away. Plus, if we do, we've actually have an agreement to do the rest of Vanguard to accommodate this. So the real question is would this help? Without this project, we have a crisis.
Right.
But is $25 million in it, and to put it into kind of show you Spenard Road, amazing benefit for the city. It was a $30 million project, and it had not just road, not just sidewalks, a huge amount of underground and electrical. It was incredible what that did. This simply averts a disaster.
Right. And Mr. Chair, just to follow up with my final point that is important to me in this conversation. I have neighbors that are 30 and 40 years deferred in seeing traffic solutions that have continuously harmed them for generations. And so this, in some ways, feels like make work along the way to avoiding actually solving the real problems. And I'm really split on the support of this project or not. I'm drawn in totally two different directions, seeing the need and seeing the fact that it's eating someone else's dinner. And I don't know how to square that.
Mr. Rivera, then I think we need to move to the next topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, 4 really quick points. So first is in terms of timing, not specific to this project, but just overall, these 4 items are on our agenda because through consultation with other assembly members, these are 4 big bucket items that we need to provide policy guidance to the administration on, which gets me to my second point. The clearer I think we can be with our policy guidance to the administration, then the easier it is for them to craft an S version of the budget that reflects the policy guidance we give them. So I haven't yet heard clear policy guidance on this specific project to give to the administration. So I think we really need to be clear with our policy guidance. Then third is, what's not shown here is there's an option B, which based on meeting with PM&E may actually be the preferred option now, who knows, but actually does not require the acquisition of the Christian Health Associates building. It requires a different building, the R&M building. So that's another factor into play. And then lastly, Mr. Chair, if you think we have time, the Community Council is here, and I don't know if they want to weigh in on this.
Yeah, would someone from the Community Council like to speak to this?
Just like to add some brief comments. I'm Bruce Roberts, President of the Advocate Community Council, and this project has been a concern for a number of years, and it is our top priority. If nothing is done, it's really going to dump a lot of traffic into a neighborhood which already has cut through of people going over to the Fred Meyer's shopping area. The residents are concerned. We had a number of meetings with some municipal engineers to see if what we could do to address some of the citizens' concerns. and ways of preventing cut-throughs. People were asking for gates, shut off the roads. I have been observing the 76th and Lower Road transaction, or the traffic there. I used to see maybe 3 to 5 cars at a time on the 76th Lower Road area, primarily on the Lower Road between Lake Otis and the frontage road. Now I see 10 to 20 cars at a time. And so that is what's happening in terms of this 10,000 plus cars per day. If that sort of traffic really comes to be from this connection of Scooter to Academy and Vanguard, I can't see anything but people trying to cut through the neighborhoods or so in general, we would like to see this project go through, but in the most fiscally responsible way possible. And I just want to say that the Community Council and our Traffic Committee and our citizens in the end support this project, but we would like to address concerns of the neighborhoods so that there's not cut-throughs.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
So just from the department's perspective, I'll just share a couple facts and then repercussions that you may want to consider in moving forward. So our project is moving forward and will continue to move forward. It is a juggernaut of a project. It is a significant project for the state of Alaska. Canceling out these kinds of projects do not occur. I would say that DDIs, diverging diamond interchanges, is currently the preferred alternative, but given the fiscal constraints that we do have currently, we're looking at every element of every project. DDIs were not in the original environmental document, but there was enough leeway to include them in the project, but certainly under certain fiscal constraints, they may not move forward. We're still looking at that. Despite us being at 95% design in the next few months. So that may not be the relief that you're hoping for. If you would like the department to include an element in a project like this, originally it was part of the project when we were doing the environmental document back in the early 2000s. There was an agreement between the municipality and the state of Alaska for the municipality to push forward this element of it. And so it did not proceed to the final completed environmental document. There's no way for us to now add this element to the project because it is a significant element. So, that being the case, it would have to be a new project, which would involve a new timeline, which would then project out probably 5 to 10 years from now. Meanwhile, the juggernaut of a project continues forward and gets constructed.
Thank you. Any other?
Mr. Chair, may I add a 30-second comment to the
Sure.
record? So, look, I understand you guys have a lot of hard decisions to make here with regard to budget. But from the standpoint of CHA, and I haven't even been involved in the project as long as the director and the assistant director have, but PM&E has been telling us for several years, literally, that this is happening and that our buildings are going to go away. So we've been working for several years, thousands of man hours, and trying to line this up, and to use the metaphor, line up the dominoes to make all this happen. And so we've been doing that. And PM&E got the money was in the bond last year. PM&E told us they were going to make us an offer. They made us that offer. We applied for grant funding. We've got properties more or less under contract. We've lined everything up. We've called in so many favors I can't even tell you. And here we are. We were ready to get this put to bed 2 months ago. And now here we are 2 months later, we're having this conversation, and this just keeps dragging on and on. And so I guess my only remark is I know you have a lot of hard decisions to make. The money is bonded for this acquisition, and I would beg you to let CHA get off this roller coaster because you're breaking our back here. And we're trying to do good work in the community with low-cost health care and recovery and mental health services. we can't do that if we have the two most important people in the organization showing up to meetings like this, trying to figure out what our future is going to be. And if this doesn't happen, our options will be limited, I think, going forward. We've lined up the very best option we can at the lowest price we can. And if we miss this opportunity, I think it's going to be very difficult for us to move forward. So thank you for allowing me to add that to the record.
Thank you. We need to move on to
Just
the next
one
thing.
last comment to our friends at DOT. I would caution you in the future from ending with a note that says, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and you're going to deal with the consequences. Because that argument is the argument of a perpetrator, not of someone in a relationship. And so I would like to frame the context a little better for the future, because I have a lot of things that I would love to say right now. Would be appropriate for the record. You know, just be cautious, because it's not fair and it's abusive in its message.
Okay.
I just would offer that.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. We're going to move on now to the AFD labor budget, item D.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Do you have a thing for this?
Not really. The budget.
I didn't put this on the questions, so I'm not sure how these particular topics ended up on that.
Yeah, we are responding.
Feels like we need to do a special voting. Yeah, I guess. I mean, if you want to general guidance, I don't think
Okay, so, Mr. Rivera, do you have anything on the questions for the administration on the AFD labor budget?
So, in general, like all of the other items on our agenda today, these are the big bucket items that I think we need to discuss, hash out, and see if there's any policy guidance we need to give. And I know this has particularly been an issue that we have heard from many constituents on and from others in our community. So I think the administration has a presentation prepared, and then it's up to us to deliberate and give guidance.
Okay, let's hear the
Keep using that
presentation.
word.
All right, the hot
Guidance.
potatoes have been thrown on. We were prepared to respond to questions, but
I have a question.
There we go.
So,
Perfect.
in years past, the conversation has always been around the idea of we have set this labor budget where it's at, and then we have overtime issues because life happens. And then the question was asked sometime in the earlier part of the year of, have we in fact built into the base budget enough to cover the anticipated labor costs outside of overtime so that we can decompress the overtime costs and make that not so much of an issue? And I believe the answer we received back was no. And so what efforts can we make towards truing the actual labor budget to what we anticipate needing so that no one gets beat up in the process of truing the actuals?
So that is a great question, and that is the work that we're undertaking now. I would say a couple things about that. The first is we've been interrogating the way the fire department budget is built, and right now there is a line item for overtime that has never reflected their actual overtime expenditures. So we would like to fix that, and that's going to require some more analysis. We'll probably have a better answer for you in 1Q. For present purposes, though, I can understand why that's sort of not a satisfying answer, right? We're supposed to be passing a budget. So what is my answer for you right now, even as I tell you that the individual components of the budget are still not fully trued up? The answer for right now is the fire department did make budget in 2017, did make budget in 2018, although with some additional lucky breaks or with some policies that we sort of not our preferred policies. What are we doing in 2019? Well, the top line answer, stepping all the way back from the overtime, however you make it work, because the overtime still didn't work in 17 and still didn't work in 18, but overall it worked. Last year, we gave the fire department actually 101.1. And so the proposal in this budget is to give them actually 103.5, so $2.4 million more dollars. All All right, 2.3 million more dollars. Then you might say, but haven't we been talking about a $4 million-ish problem for the fire department? How does $2.4 million fix that hole? And there the answer is, it may not fully fix that hole, but it is the best that we have for you right now, and we'll have to come back to you and finish the story in one queue. And why is that? So on the reconciliation page of the budget, you can see there are things that move every year. So the salaries are going to get $1 million more expensive as some of the one-time academy costs come out and the new academy costs come in. The upshot is when you true it all the way up, it does look like if everything happened next year the way it happened this year, there's still a missing $2 million-ish somewhere. Where does that come from? At least partially, it will come from two things. First, this year we had a one-time, unexpected leave cash-out situation, which will not repeat itself in the same magnitude next year. It will repeat itself a little bit next year, but we're not going to have a good handle on that until the year actually closes out. Second is, this year we had record levels of overtime, and part of that was caused by the fact that our academy came so late. This year we're going to fix that by having the fully throated, full-size academy from the beginning and hopefully fix that in perpetuity. So if there's still a missing or a possible $2 million issue, part of that will be reduced by less overtime and less leave cash out. So what would you do in this budget? You could just push all $2 million in to fill that gap and say that's more than you actually need, but then you're going to have to cut something else out of the budget to make that happen. Our answer has been, this is the best information we have right now. We will come back to you when the year actually closes and we can true up all of our overtime and leave cash out projections, and then there will probably be some additional adjustment in first quarter budget.
So back to the 2 million and change. Where does that get plugged into the budget? I don't have it in front of me. Are we getting to the root of the question, which is more staff? Or are we continuing to fill the overtime category where we're paying more for less when we could figure out a way up front to front the cost and actually, although it's counterintuitive, use labor to solve the labor problem?
And if I can go further down the rabbit hole with you, fire has a uniquely difficult overtime versus new bodies question that I'm not fully prepared to explain right now because we're still working it out. But the short version is this. The way the fire department IAFF contract works, we have to maintain minimum staffing. We also guarantee that a certain number of firefighters may take regularly scheduled annual leave on top of that minimum staffing every day. I believe it is the case that that gives us basically no cushion at all for sick and light duty folks being out. So we're incurring overtime in a way that is different from other departments where we have been able to structure the leave. We say, sorry, not everybody can be out in July. Someone's got to take vacation in March. And the way the contract works, as you add new firefighters, the number of firefighters you must allow to be off on schedule and leave also grows. So the question of how do you optimize the overtime versus personnel staffing for fire is more complicated and different from everybody else in a way that I don't have an answer for you as I'm sitting right here now, but I will tell you the tie to my list of things that we're figuring out.
Last comment for me then, is it feasible to negotiate with the trades to provide for a flex person or people on every shift so that when you come to the point where one person's off, so we have to close down the rig and redistribute the staff, we could have a floating person by contract that fills that role, right? Because it seems like there's got to be a way for us to come up with a better mechanism than to flow down the number of pieces of equipment in service.
Yeah, through the chair, the formal answer is, of course, anything is negotiable. The next answer is that we are due to open the contract. The contract expires in summer of 2020. So these kind of questions are high on our list. I don't think anything comes for free, though. So if, for instance, we said, right now, if you took a graph of all the fire leave picks, it's high on Thanksgiving and Christmas, and then huge in the summer, and nobody picks these other times. You could smooth that out. A lot of the overtime would just disappear. Will the union say, sure, we'll do that for free? No, they're probably not. So there will be some kind of negotiations where we can solve that. If you had someone on recall status to plug the gap if the sick leave was happening, that's a different version of what would happen in the normal course now, where we just call someone back on overtime status. maybe that's a more palatable thing to call somebody back on straight time. I don't know, but
Pay someone to be that flex person.
Yeah.
You could go on that duty for 4 months or something, or some other structure. Yeah, framing it as forcing people to take leave when you want them to is certainly not an idea that I would want to have if it were me. Well, you can have a vacation, but only at a time when it's muddy and gray. Anyhow, I can see the challenge there. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Zolotel and then Mr. Dyson.
Thank you. Maybe this is too simplistic, but can't we figure out on a yearly basis the average number of hours of overtime over how many ever, whatever time period, and kind of use that as a guidepost toward where we may or may not have a shortfall? Because it seems like doing it in year snapshots, I understand the precise, wanting the precise calculations, but I feel like we need kind of a guidepost so that we could maybe predict what it may look like next year before waiting for the true-ups in 1Q.
So the answer to that question is, of course, yes, but it comes with at least 2 asterisks. The first is, it does move a lot year over year, and it can move like $1 million year over year. So to pick an average number, it's still not going to give you the great certainty. It's not like it is a stable number every year. But second, the baseline that number is built on keeps changing. So we added firefighters in 17. So if you go back beyond that, it's not necessarily apples to apples anymore. So we can run all of those, but it moves and it changes. And last, there's not a super good reason to think that it has ever been right. So if the budgeted number has been $4 million and we've been $5 to $6 million for the last several years, it may not be that what you need to do is true up the budgeted number to the actual number. It may be that you just have to add more to the overall budget to make up the difference between the experienced overtime, or rather the actual overage for the fire department, if that makes any sense. And that gets to at the top level, what the Assembly really does is push over $103 million to the fire department and say, go do this. It doesn't formally push over a overtime budget, and so those overtime numbers have drifted from reality across the board.
If I may, Mr. Chair. Yeah, if we're hearing Chair Rivera's policy guidance request, the policy guidance, I guess, that I would want the body to consider is some way to at least not be back in the same position we're in today next year, and whatever that is, if there's an additional cushion needed or something we could base it off of, even if it's not 100%, grounded in absolute fact, then I guess I would much rather be there than trying to explain this complicated system of why we're pulling apparatus off. So to the extent we can help do that, please help us help you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question, hopefully a follow-up. But you all have heard me be a tireless nag about when the contracts come up, to make sure we have all the management prerogatives we need to have to manage the business. And this is a fairly good example. Mr. Falsey, do you know if, are you forced to take candidates for overtime from a union list where the oldest and longest standing employees get first shot at the...
I'll defer to the fire chief who knows the contract more than anything that I do.
Our overtime list is based on a rotation, so it is not based on seniority. It's a rotation, so if you took the overtime, you moved to the bottom of the list.
Do you know if the APD is the same way? I think not.
I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Legitimate things to follow, because it can be manipulated. The senior employees get the most money, and oh, by the way, it falls in the last 3 years, which affects retirement benefit. But thank you both. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was going to ask about the an earlier year where the budget was on target, but it sounds like that wouldn't necessarily be a helpful frame of reference, since Mr. Falsey, you mentioned it's not really apples to apples. I was curious about what was effective in that budget being on target. And then I also wanted to ask about how many apparatus have been closed in District 6. And I am telling folks that any end of year overage will be paid for out of savings. And that's accurate, correct?
Yeah, taking those questions serially. In 2017, one of the main factors that helped the fire department come in budget was that we took a tender out of service for over 6 months, which I think is not the preferred alternative for anybody. In 2018, it was actually relatively normal operations, but there were some internal lucky breaks.
For bond debt, their bond debt amount that they had to pay for was less than we had budgeted, so they were allowed to manage with that.
On the second question, when at the end of the year, if the fire department is over, are we taking it out of fund balance? I guess the answer is sort of functionally yes, except that what we're really doing is robbing from the other departments to make up for the fire department's overage, because there isn't really a fund balance to draw from. In the main, I think that because we're having a light snow year, that the maintenance and operation folks are going to come in under, and as fire comes in over, then the maintenance and operations not spending its money is going to make up for the fire department shortfall. But it's not as though our savings are at 15% of our reserves and we'll just draw it down to 12, whereas the minimum we're allowed to be at. I think we're going to hit the end of the year pretty close to 0. I mean, right on target.
And how many closures so far?
In District 6, I'll have to look that up as I sit here now. That may be one that you ask me more questions, I will find the answer as I multitask.
Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thanks. Just briefly, you just mentioned a light snow year. Does that mean just 2019, not the projected 2020, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And light snow year actually translates to savings mostly through the hauling budget. Whether it snows or not, in the main, changes how much the streets folks spend by how much they are taking out of cul-de-sacs and putting in the snow dump.
You know, and that's great. I just wanted to make sure you were talking about the calendar year that's just expiring in 2 months, not projecting forward into
Correct.
this season. It's key season. It's 2019, 2020 kind of thing. So, okay, and just with that, I would say thanks again to the chief. The administration is a hard ball to balance and pressure in every direction. I get it. And thank you.
Okay. Is there any other questions? Do you have some follow-up, Mr. Falsey?
I can attempt this. All right. So District 6 covers 8, 9, and 10. Yes? Is that right? Do you also have 15?
Is that yours?
No. Okay. 8, 9, and 10. In the week of the 21st to the 27th.
It doesn't put 15.
Okay. Well, I'll give you all of the numbers so that everyone beyond those specifically District 6 can play along. For the week of October 21st to the 27th, there was no closure on the first day. Truck 3 came out for one day on the second day. No closure on the third. Tender 14 came out on the fourth day. Truck 5, and by the way, these numbers track to the station. I should have said that. Truck 5 came out on the fifth day. Tender 9 came out on the sixth day, and well, 5 and 14 came out on the seventh day. Moving to the week prior, the week of the 14th, no closure, then tender 14, then no closure, no closure, no closure, then tender 9, then no closure. And then moving back one more in time, the week of the 7th through the 13th, no closure, truck 3, no closure, no closure, truck 5, truck 12, truck 9. And do I have the week prior? I'm not sure I can pull that one out. I can get you that first week, but maybe not as we're sitting here right now. Oh, here I got it. Here we go. First week, truck 1, truck 9, truck 1, then truck 1 again plus tender 9, then truck 5, then nothing, then truck 1. So those are the 4 weeks we've been at it so far.
It's like 18 closures or so.
I will defer to your arithmetic.
Okay.
Sounds plausible.
I have a follow-up question on that thing. I'm surprised to hear anything from Station 1 got shut down because my perception.
3 to 4 times.
No, I'm surprised to hear that something from Station 1 got shut down because my perception is that Station 1 is the busiest or among the busiest. So I guess first my question is why, and clear that up for me. And then 2, have there been any harms from those closures? Have we been able to document any cases where our reaction times were impacted by those closures?
So I'll take a first crack at it, and then I'll defer to the fire chief. Truck 1 came out a couple of reasons. First, because we found it was least disruptive to match the closure to where people were calling in sick, so that rather than try to scramble everybody. We sort of took it out there. Truck One also sort of offered the bang for the buck because there's 4 people on that apparatus. To the second question, yes, whenever you take anything out of service, the reaction time is slower as a almost mathematical rule. I don't think we have anything we can point to where we say this house burned down because we didn't get there quick enough, or this person experienced a more extreme cardiac arrest because we didn't get there quick enough. But all of this does require us to continue the level of geographic coverage in a thinner coverage model.
Thank you. Can you roll this up?
I can. Thank you. Up or down?
That's good. Right there, thanks.
Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, first, just want to give a rationale for why I keep using the term policy guidance, just in case anyone is confused. Particularly for these 4 buckets, I think it's going to be very messy on the floor if we decide, when we vote on the budget, to change things around to work on these 4 buckets. So the more that we can do this work in advance, I think the easier it is for us and for the administration to make sure we're not screwing anything up. Specific to this one, in terms of the policy guidance, I think a mixture between what Mr. Constant said and what Ms. Salatel said sounds like the guidance from us on to the administration, and then just confirm with the administration that the first quarter is going to be where we have solutions presented to us, with hopefully that being permanent in the budget starting in 2021.
Yes, my reaction to that is yes, we will come back to you in the first quarter with more of a story about the leave cash out and the overtime. We will try our level best to give you a solution that does not result in this kind of rolling closures next year. That's our goal too. I will tell you though that it will probably never come to pass that we will ever say we guarantee that nothing like this can ever happen again, for the reason that I talked about when we first began talking about the fire department budget, which is if they are ever experiencing an unexpected expense, the only thing they can do is stop buying stuff, and their stop buying stuff budget is already shrunk to the smallest point that it reasonably probably can be. You got to buy hose. And then the other alternative is some version of this. So we will certainly do our best to build in some projections where we say we don't think that this is a likely scenario at all, but it will probably not come to pass that we can ever guarantee that we would never do this unless we're willing to say the budget is notional, because it's just going to cost whatever it costs, and we'll come back to you for extra money if we need it.
Okay, let's go Mr. Peterson and Mr. Constant, and let's move on to the next topic, which is homelessness, which I know will take a lot of time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
And do we know how much we saved by those 18 closures last month? Is that number available?
Yes, that number is available. It will require us to add 4 numbers. The first number in the first week was $28,800. The next week was $46,800. Oh, you got total. Just look at this. The fire chief has a running total, $72,000 so far.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Constant.
No, and just, it seems like also the policy guidance is toward the negotiation that is coming up. Should be having conversations where if this is the only vehicle that we have, then the question I would ask them is, then how do we make this acceptable to you, right? And I know that's an impossible question to answer, but that's where miracle workers come into play. And so that's the squaring of that question. If this is the only vehicle, then how do we make this work with the other partner in the conversation? And so just put that on the table.
Thank you. All right, so with that, we'll move on to homelessness. Do you have a presentation on this one? Does anyone?
I'm out. I'm all the way out.
Okay, thank you. Or did you have a presentation?
It is a beautiful one slide in black and white with a little bit of red. So
Okay, great.
That sounds great.
We'll just leave the lights on.
But just you wait for the MLMP information.
Lots of red there. Lots of red there.
No, there's a lot of green.
A lot of green. Oh, nice. Wait a minute.
By the way, my policy guidance for to the sponsor. My policy guidance for Vanguard is find something better to spend that money on. It's my policy guidance. It's here my colleagues agree.
Sounded like you and John have the same policy guidance, and kind of Chris too.
Yeah, we have Bull Road on the bond because of the problems as well.
Well, $4 million, $25 million, a lot with.
Okay, I think
Mr. Haberman, thank you so much.
Okay. Very well.
I will, before we go through this, as you can see, the red line that says that these totals are the totals from the enacted budget after first quarter budget revisions, with circumstances and timing associated with homelessness issues. We try and do what we can, as Mr. Falsey said, with the information that we currently have for our proposed budget process in November, and always refine in first quarter budget with the needs associated with additional overflow shelter that will happen in October, any additional shelter the Assembly may want during the summer period, whatever the desires are. So I can go through this quickly with you and then we can ask questions. The 2019 budget versus enacted one quarter budget versus the 2020 proposed budget has all of these numbers associated. So for camp abatement, the enacted 2019 budget was $483,000. In the proposed budget, we currently have $348,000. The difference between these two things, aside from additional funding, is that we have switched each of these things with the asterisks next to them from a one-time capital cost to a recurring operational cost, which means that it is funded with recurring money, and it will be in the budget every single year unless the administration or the Assembly takes it out. So it automatically rolls, as opposed to being an extraction and an add the same way it's been represented over the last 3 years. It's ongoing.
I'm sorry, David has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you're saying that the total that was spent in 2019 was 43.
Through the chair to Ms. Quinn Davidson, spent is a different word in our universe. The total that was budgeted is 483. We won't know what was actually spent until the end of the year, and we're able to true up what the actual expenditures were. Because some of these will be less because of personnel vacancies or because they found a more efficient way to do it or whatever the circumstances are. So we're waiting until we get all of those numbers back from 2019 to determine exactly what was spent where and how it needs to be spent in 2020 to A, continue or improve the level of service that has been done, and B, make sure that everything is either budgeted appropriately, higher or lower, as we need to when we go through 2020. So spent is a dangerous word.
It just seems that it's difficult for us to see. I mean, if we're truly trying to compare it to last year and what we accomplished, and then
This
decide
year,
whether
2019 is this year.
Well, yeah. So last year's budget that we approved, or whatever, if we want to compare it to that and what we accomplished or will accomplish, how do we do that without knowing what we spent? I mean,
and that's why the one quarter budget process exists. The way that our calendar years match up and our funding process matches up, the reason one quarter budget revisions exist is so that we can use actual numbers associated with revenues and costs from the previous year. So I appreciate that the public and the Assembly treats this as the budget process. This is the first budget process. The second and final budget process is in first quarter, and we sometimes make sweeping revisions in 1Q based on new information, new revenues, or any new project that the community is interested in.
I guess then specifically, can you talk, I assume you're going to talk about why such a drastic reduction in camp abatement?
Because of what I just said. We're trying to make sure that what we have is the ongoing money available. So right now, budgeting with any one-time money is done in other areas of the budget, which Mr. Wilbur could allude to if there are any other one-time expenditures. But what we have discussed is this budget, depending on Assembly approval, and then in 1Q, either taking funding from somewhere else to supplement these needs based on actuals from 2019, or potentially additional ongoing funding be identified and being added to these things. The administration fully supports adding to these items, but we think that it's appropriate to do in 1Q once we actually have numbers returned from 2019.
Okay, because that's a little different than we're making it part of continuation budget, and that's
Correct.
what I heard you focus on earlier. Okay.
The good news is that this is becoming, the numbers that you see here are becoming part of continuation budget.
Right, I understand that
yes,
part.
okay. So camp abatement, the mobile intervention team is going from $385 to $550 to fund an additional social services referral provider. Right now, there are There's the supervisor, there's a social services referral provider, and there is an outreach manager. Throughout the past year and a half, while the MIT has existed, there was also another position that was funded through a partnership with Rural Cap. 85%, I think, of that money was funded through a grant with the Health Department and Rural Cap, specifically to perform the duties that the MIT does, outreach to the community members who are experiencing homelessness and any other necessary needs for the providers or the police department. But that position is currently vacant, and we are not sure about the status of that agreement and whether or not that will continue. So adding an additional social services provider and part-time data/admin clerk is accomplished in that 165. The shelter funding, this one is tricky. You see it in your budget identified as Midtown Shelter, Stolt Building, something associated with day shelter or overflow. Right now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the fact that there has been the flag of private investment from nonprofits and local companies, upwards of $40 million over 5 years. We're in conversation with the Rasmussen Foundation, Providence, Primera, and Widener to determine what the best course of action for the community is. Is it an additional night shelter? Is it an additional day shelter? What are those things that the community needs to continue moving forward, resolving homelessness, while all the other projects are coming on and bolstering the process? So there's additional permanent supportive housing that the funders are interested in, additional sheltering capacity, additional treatment and case management. So this is transitioning from a one-time to an ongoing cost. Again, it's lower than the number in the 2019 enacted, but the proposed 2019 budget only had 150, and we added 150. I believe Ms. Alatel was the mover of that amendment in 1Q budget revisions. So we expect that to need to increase too. This funding is identified in the budget with that line item, but could be used should anything not come to pass on a specific project, could be used for the overflow shelter from October through December of 2020, the same way we have a contract from October through April of next year funded.
Yeah, Ms. Soloto?
Thank you. So I want to make sure I understand that, because we are going to look at emergency shelter funding for next winter in 1Q, is what you're telling me, because there is nothing built into here right now for that. Because we're good through this winter, that will end in 2020, but for the winter starting this time next year, we don't have anything. Absent that $250,000 not being used.
Correct. Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you. And then the Homelessness Services Coordinator within the Health Department, I think we've explained this to many of you, but the current position that's within the mayor's office is a policy choice by this administration to fund that position and have that position do that work. It is not a guarantee for whoever may be the next mayor for that position to be held within the policy level of the administration. We know that this work needs to continue being done contractually and on a coordination basis with the coalition and the other providers as time moves forward. So the intent is to bring a person on at mid-year of 2020, get them trained up and familiar with all of the work that has been done and is being done. At the end of 2020, Ms. Burke's position will go away from the budget in the mayor's office, and this position will take on the job duties of performing those things through the health department.
So I was under the impression that Ms. Burke's position was funded through the Mental Health Trust.
To the chair, that was the previous arrangement, which I believe was a 3-year term, and now the assembly or the municipality pays entirely for her position.
Through the mayor's.
Through the mayor's budget, correct.
Okay. Did you have your hand up, Mr. Essen? Okay. All right. Any questions for Ms. Browse? Ms. Zolotow.
Thank you. In terms of policy guidance, I have expressed it at Rules Committee. I don't think you were there. That it's
fully my intention to figure out some kind of amendment or work with the administration to take a position out of the mobile intervention team as is operationalized and put it external to ourselves so there's a better liaison with social services, whether that's the coalition or somebody else. Because I think what we've heard, and actually the information you provided, thank you, really demonstrated is we're missing that linchpin in the MIT process to make it effective. So I'm share that with my colleagues and with you that that's where I am headed, and I would definitely welcome doing that together, or I could just move it.
And through the chair to Ms. Zalatel, I know you're interested in that. And the good news is that we have heard that the coalition actually has already posted a position that does exactly that. So it may already be funded through the work the coalition is doing. We also know that some of the funding that the Rasmussen Foundation is interested in using would bolster the coalition. So working on that as we move forward is a great idea because it may be redundant or it could be shifted to be something else that you think would be necessary.
Well, I would just like to say, I think it's important that the municipality put money into the external workings of the coalition to do this very critical piece, both to show we are a true member of the coalition and to underscore the importance of that piece in kind of alleviating some of the stress placed on our other systems like police, fire, EMT, camp abatement. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alta. Are there any other questions for Ms. Browse? Presentation. Okay. Are there any, because I do see members of the public here, is there any comments from members of the public on this topic before we move on to MLMP? Go ahead. Please identify yourself for the record.
Sure, my name is Russ Webb. I'm a resident of the South Addition. Something missing here that was previously in the mayor's budget that I had some concerns about, and that is the addition of 4 police officers for trail safety. I'd like to ask.
It's still there. It's in a different part of the budget.
Okay. Let me make some comments about that. Frankly, I think that is a wasted endeavor. The issues about public safety related to the illegal camps that proliferate throughout the community on public spaces, not just along the trail system, will not be addressed and have not been addressed by police officers patrolling the trails. The crime occurs not on the trails. It is a rare event that there's a crime on the trails, and neither the police officers nor the mayor have ever indicated that crime on the trails is an issue. Crime occurs in the camps themselves, but primarily through drug use and other things, but primarily in the surrounding neighborhoods where there are concentrations of camps. Neighborhoods are subject to constant thefts, break-ins, break-ins in sheds, yards, garages, and homes where material both to construct and maintain camps is stolen, and material that can be readily converted to cash or bartered for drugs is stolen. That is the primary public safety issue that citizens have been complaining about. We've had police for the last couple of summers doing bike patrols on the trails during the summer. Bike patrols have done nothing to address the crime. Citizens have been told that we'll have police, if we have these 4 police officers patrolling the trails on snow machines and fat bikes and 4-wheelers and whatever. That's what police are not doing to. In the rare event, it would be, the chances are minuscule of police officers on the trail, probably one at a time, patrolling 120 miles of trail, are going to intervene in the case of a crime to stop a crime in progress. Not going to happen. They aren't going to go into the camps and do knock and talks to identify people with outstanding warrants. They've never done that. Even the CAP team doesn't do that. So we're not going to arrest people who have warrants. They are not going to deter crime because the crime occurs off trail and the material is brought back to the camps, which are off trail. That amount of money would be far better utilized. The only thing that will really make a difference in public safety issues presented by the illegal camps is eliminating the illegal camps. And you can only do that by year-round effective enforcement and having enough shelter beds to allow you to do year-round effective code enforcement and camp abatement. If you want to put more than $500,000 into something, make sure you have enough shelter beds and hire park rangers who will be dedicated to the parks to do ongoing enforcement, preventing camps from setting up and posting notices and doing abatements on a year-round basis. You don't have to pick up all the trash. You have to prevent them from accumulating mountains of trash. You can come back, as Ms. Pearson has suggested, in the summertime, close an area and then pick up the trash. Don't waste that money on police officers. We may need more police officers, I'm sure of that, but trail safety is not the reason we need them, and they will ultimately be diverted from trail safety to their true mission in any case, whether it's, well, this mayor is in office or a future mayor. They will not be doing trail safety, they will be doing regular police patrol. Thank you.
Mr. Dyson?
Yeah, thanks. Just encourage all of us to look at the paper that came from Mr. Webb. And when Mr. Peters and I were in the legislature, Mr. Webb was the head of a department looking after child safety and stuff. Remember, his wife is Stephanie Rhodes, legendary therapeutic judge. What they have to say, I think, carries a lot of weight.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Mr. Perez-Radia, then Mr. Weddleton.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess I'm already on the record in a previous meeting voicing concern about spending over $500,000 on police officers that are dedicated to trails. I don't think it is a decision that is based in good information. I think that it's based in something else. And I expressed at that last meeting that I think if the police force came forward and said, we need 4 more officers because we have some significant crime challenges in our city, and we are under, we're below the number of police officers that are necessary in order to make our city safe. So we need these, and we're going to deploy those officers in the most important and vital places in our city. That's a really strong argument, and that makes sense to me. But that's not what's going on right now, is that we're saying we're going to hire people to patrol trails, but there's no evidence presented by the police officers that there's a need there, that there is crime going on there, that is a high priority area. And I know that there are members of the assembly that don't agree with me on this, but I find it really difficult to be put in a position to vote for a budget with over $500,000 for something that we have not justified as a need. So I guess I would just say, in terms of policy guidance, I would really like the administration to rethink their proposal in terms of what that budget item is and what it's used for. I do know that the police officers who have spoken have said, yeah, of course, if we need to pull them off that, then we can deploy them to somewhere else. But to have them as that is the purpose and that is what they're dedicated for concerns me greatly.
Thank you, Mr. Browse, and we've got some members in the queue. Oh, okay. Well, actually, Mr. Weddleton was, and then Ms. LaFrance was in the queue.
I kind of listening to Cameron, but also Russ, and thanks for your email on that. But I think part of it is, particularly Russ's thing, is just only trails. And if the concept were kind of expanded to that we have 4 that are dedicated to these spin-off problems from the campers in the park, they'd be dealing with the theft of the neighborhoods and kind of more focused on that. Does that work more for you? Because I kind of, if all they do is focus on that asphalt strip going through the park, that is absurd.
Well, look, piggybacking 4 police officer positions onto the homeless budget is great because citizens are interested in solving the problem of illegal camps. So I get why the mayor's office is doing that. There, as Mr. Perez-Verdia says, there is no evidence, and none has been presented, that we have a crime problem on or even adjacent to the trails. If we want more police officers to respond quicker to the thefts that are occurring throughout our city, great. Put it out there, let's see the data, let's talk about that as a problem. Don't piggyback it on and act as though we are going to solve the issue of the illegal camps and ask for money for additional police officers. We need the money for year-round enforcement.
So to be clear, though, those 4 police officers are not in the homelessness budget, nor have they ever been presented as being part of the homeless budget. That's why they weren't up here.
Okay, they are presented as trail safety, okay?
Which is, yeah.
And it's never explained otherwise. We have been told, the only thing citizens have been told is this. Police will patrol the trails, and they have the authority to arrest people who have outstanding warrants. And they can make arrests as needed. All police officers have that authority and do that every day. Okay? So.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Webb. Ms. LaFrance, you have a question?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to make the same comment that this is not in the homeless budget or affiliated with it, and that I thought the chief was very clear that these are not so much for officers dedicated to the trails per se, that they will be deployed to the priority as APD handles the stacks as they normally do. And I would also say that yes, this is in response to what we've heard from our constituents about trail safety. Many people flat out avoid the trails. I do by myself because they're viewed as dangerous. So I know I'm just saying what's already been said, but I don't think that these are necessarily competing with those other priorities.
Thank you, Ms. Brous.
Through the chair to Mr. Weddleton and Mr. Perez-Verdia and Ms. LaFrance and Mr. Webb and Ms. Rhodes and everybody else. I think what we're dealing with here is a little bit of a semantic issue around a static piece of paper that says trail safety officers. Now, what I heard from Mr. Webb and Mr. Perez-Verdia, and I think everyone in this room can agree that Anchorage would be better off with more police officers. We're 150 officers underneath the national average for a community of our size. We understand that the community has issues with trail safety and otherwise. They are not included as part of the homelessness budget, as you saw them not be reviewed as part of the homelessness budget, because it's not intended to solve homelessness. Those positions were intended to add to the force, and at the request of the Assembly and their priority list, ask the chief and the APD organization to include additional trail patrols as part of this personnel ad. So in order to identify that clearly for the Assembly, the title was put on that piece of paper. I apologize if there's any miscommunication that's going on, that they are going to be dedicated only to trails and that they are going to solve homelessness. We can all agree that that is not something that is going to happen with 4 additional police officers. It will increase public safety within the community at large. They will be tasked with patrolling trails in a more aggressive fashion than the average patrol officer currently does. And we asked the police department to consider that in their operational plans for 2020. So I think if the body sees fit to not fund those positions, then so be it. If you would like to change the title on the AM support, that may happen in an S version anyway. So I think it's all part of the conversation about what direction you want to go with those items.
Ms. Rhodes, I saw your hand up a little while ago too. Do you want to comment on this?
So I have a slightly different take on this, which is, first, in terms of how you tell the public what you're doing, which is an important thing about government, it was actually addressed in the homelessness committee meeting, so it very much is part of your consideration in terms of homeless response. So just so you recall. So we show up to finance committee meetings when we see homeless budget issues, because when we go to those meetings, that's what you're talking about in terms of the budget. So just so you know, maybe you could be a little more transparent about what your agenda items are intended to cover. None of these handouts are ever on the website, so maybe a little more transparency for these things would be helpful. But with respect to the substance here, first of all, I have 2 things to say. One is about what you discussed today. You know, when you talk about these being static pieces of paper that throw positions into a budget, you know, that's what MIT is, with all due respect to you folks who are giving more money for that job. We don't see outcome measures for that work, and we frankly do think it's a bit of a failure. Your most recent statistics show you that only 10% of individuals are actually moving to shelter when they're abated. So you're still playing whack-a-mole, now you're doing it at a zone level. Shelter, incredibly imperative. That is the legal requirement for abatement. Year-round abatement, incredibly important because they do amass these tons of trash over the winter. You're not going to remove the trash, but you can remove the people. And with respect to the 4 police officers that you don't want to talk about today because it's not on the agenda, let me just say, I ran a mental health court, started one, ran it for 25 years. Here's what I know from my experience. The vast majority of people who are in corrections today are overrepresented with behavioral health problems. So if you take a nail and you take a hammer like a cow and you try to solve those problems with that hammer, you are going to end up criminalizing people when really what you want to do is you want a steward for your parks to address what's going on in your parks. You want that steward to be able to call law enforcement when there's a law enforcement issue that's legitimate. But you do not want that approach because you will then be paying so much more money for these incredibly expensive police positions and to be jailing people when the truth is we still don't have enough behavioral health treatment for them. Attracting them to shelters by moving encampments out and making it very, very, very uncomfortable to camp puts them into the shelter system, which is where your solutions to homelessness lie, not in government.
Thank you. Mr. Constant, thank you.
Yeah,
Mr. Peterson.
I don't disagree with just about everything I've heard. I have one minority report to give that I actually don't believe at every turn we should increase police. We should increase police in balance with all the other functions of government so that we don't have an extraordinarily overweight department. We have health department needs and we have parks department needs and we have all the other needs that are out there. And originally I had hoped that these would be park ranger kind of positions, peace officers under the code as opposed to police officers. It didn't happen, and I can support this even with the idea that they'll spend a lot of time on the trails because, frankly, 120 miles of unpatrolled, as I've said before, commuter pathways, which is what these are. It doesn't hurt to have a presence out there, but we still have to approach the concerns that we've heard from the public here today. I don't believe that we did talk about it at the homeless meeting. Maybe I was wrong. I thought it was at the public safety meeting that this was part of the topic, but all that being said is we have a policy decision to make, and 4 more cops is value, park rangers is a value. We are funding shelter beds. We are working assertively to clear the camps. We need to do more of that.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and just following up on what Mr. Constant said, we are adding the Stope building. We're putting additional money into that shelter, aren't we? Or is
that is not a guarantee. What that is the line item specifically for overflow or day shelter, depending on how the projects develop over the next few months. But however that money is spent, this body will either approve or deny the proposals that come forward.
But that's a definite possibility that we're under consideration.
Some additional space, yes.
Right. And call them trail police, whatever, park rangers, whatever. You know, they're not going to be just driving up and down the trails. They'll be moving around into where they see there could be a potential problem. And they're hoping to catch people moving their camp from one spot to another and stopping them from setting up. Obviously, 4 people, considering all the parks we have, it may not be an adequate number, but you know, this is the first year. It's sort of a pilot program, so to speak, and we'll see if we get any feedback as to how effective it is. I've been hearing from a couple of community councils that in areas I represent that we needed park rangers for 70 years. So that's why it's in the budget, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Okay. Any other comments? We're going to extend by at least 10 minutes for MLMP because we started a little late. Is there any other comments or questions on homelessness? Okay. All right, let's move on then to the MLMP discussion. presentation?
We do, and we may need to have the lights turned down. Thank you, Mr. Haberman. And I'm happy to provide this to the website if it's helpful or for distribution via PDF. Today, Ona and I are going to talk a little bit about what the restrictions are on where the proceeds from the MLMP sale go, and then kind of what the options are, the menu of options this body can consider and provide guidance on moving into the next budget season. So starting with the charter, this is the language that was passed via the ballot proposition that governed the sale of MLMP to Chugach Electric, and it provides fairly clear guidance on what the options are for use of the proceeds. So the first priority is a portion of any annual payment equivalent to the municipal utility service assessment shall be deemed and treated as a payment in lieu of taxes and shall be available to municipality for appropriation. So basically the portion of the transaction proceeds, which is the money that comes in under the PILT agreement, pursuant to this language, comes in under the tax cap, replaces the MUSA. It's essentially a one-for-one correlation, although acknowledging that that's a number that fluctuated from year to year because it was a payment that was based on the value of assets. And it will just plug that hole in the budget. And then we have the rest of the proceeds of the sale, which are to be disposed of in accordance with Charter Section 1311. Charter Section 1311 was passed during the sale of the ATU telephone utility to govern what happened to the proceeds of a utility sale, the sale of a utility owned by the municipality, and it creates what I have called the waterfall provision, which basically is sort of the order of operations for use of the proceeds of any utility sale. Those proceeds go first to retire the debt of that utility, so in this instance to pay down MLMP's bond debt, then to retire any other municipal debt deemed appropriate by the assembly, so any other debts that we have as a municipality that you might want to pay off, and then whatever's left over goes into the trust fund. The language in the charter is to establish a trust fund. The trust fund now exists. It was established with the proceeds of the ATU sale, and it is governed by a provision of Title VI of Municipal Code in terms of how it's invested and what the dividends are that it spins off in any given year. So in terms of the transaction proceeds, what does that look like here? The transaction proceeds for the MLMP sale, again, have multiple parts. There's the upfront cash payment, and then we have the PILT agreement payments over 50 years. Then we have the Eklutna PPA payments over 35 years, and that's our total transaction proceeds. Can the price change? There are a couple of things that factors that will go into what the price actually ends up being at closing. One is vacation. At closing, we will pay the value. You know what I'm saying? Vacation illustration? So where we all like to be right now. The one is the vacation. We are, as we've talked about several times, we're sending our people over to Chugach with their vacation intact. So where our employees will go to Chugach with all of their leave, their cashable leave balances intact, we will pay Chugach the value of those that leave as an offset against, or effectively we'll pay them, but really it'll be an offset against what they pay us at closing. We also agreed in the contract to an offset for any excluded assets. When we entered into the contract, there was some question of whether they would take all of MLMP's property. And at this point, they have elected to take all of MLMP's property. So that is a $0 value change. That won't be affected. Mr. Chair, do you want to take questions as we go along?
I'm sorry. Yeah, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do we have an idea, a ballpark figure of how much vacation is included at this point?
We do. It's on my next slide.
Oh,
yeah.
Excuse me, I have a question on this portion.
Yeah, Mr. Dyson.
Are there any of these properties that we should think about them becoming tax paying as opposed to payment of lieu taxes?
Through the chair, we don't have that option. We've agreed to sell them, and if they are owned by Chugach as a cooperative utility, then under state law they're exempt from property taxes. They've agreed to pay us this payment in lieu of taxes, acknowledging that they are tax paying.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Onward. So, in terms of what does that actually mean for the projected upfront payment? Right now, the projected upfront payment is set at $757,800.
assuming that we agree that this body approves of the settlement agreement that will be before you tonight, because that includes a $10 million change. This number might also shift downward a bit more as well, because there's another component of that settlement agreement where we agree that if we don't come in at the projected net book value for our assets, we've agreed to further lower the price. We don't know that change yet, so just an asterisk to this number. It may decrease a little bit. And again, this is the number assuming approval by this body of the settlement that'll be before you tonight. So minus that accrued leave liability, again, minus net book value of excluded assets. So what does that look like? Our current estimate for accrued leave liability is about $2.5 million. $0 value for any excluded assets, which means we predict an upfront payment of about $755 million. And so adding this all together, again, we have upfront payment plus PILT plus including the PPA. That looks like $755 million in that estimated upfront payment. 166.8 million in PILT payments. That's a net present value number because that's over 50 years. Same is true for the including the PPA, which is a net present value of about $75 million. I should say, as an asterisk to this number actually has two components because we have entered into an agreement with MEA for their portion of this. The net book value is approximately the same, or the net present value is approximately the same of the two, dividing up the interest between two parties as opposed to one. So we're keeping this around $75 million number in our projections right now. That's a total transaction proceeds of $997 million. So where can the money go? Again, we go back to the charter language that we started with. We've got three sources of money: PILT payments, upfront payment, PPA payments over 35 years. The PILT payment, again, pretty clear, goes straight into the annual budget, replacing USA. So that basically is one for one, just plugs a hole in the budget, means that we don't immediately have to raise taxes. Upfront payment, there's the first portion, $529.7 million is our current estimate. Again, asterisk to this is our current estimate as of today. All of this may change a little bit based on the date that we close. But right now our estimate is $529.7 million will be required to pay off MLNP debt at closing. That leaves us with $225.6 million left over. And then our PPA payments, again, over 35 years, are $75 million. And so these two, the $225.6 million and the $75 million, are where we have the choice of either putting money toward payoff of MOA debt or putting it into the MOA trust. And I will pass the microphone to Ona. So to clarify all of this just a little more, the total transaction proceeds, the PILT payment must replace the MUSA. So this body considers $0 of that being invested. The Eklutna PPA over 35 years is $75 million over time. The upfront payment that less the MLNP debt is $225 million in a lump sum. So those are the two items of consideration for proceeds adhering to the charter language. So what is eligible MOA debt is the fun question. So the first category is general obligation debt approved by the voters that the municipality currently holds in the total of $403 million. So this is road bonds, public safety bonds, all of the things. The next, those are financed between 2 and 4% depending on when they were issued and what their term is, et cetera, et cetera. Mr. Slipka, correct me if any of this is wrong. Don't worry, they checked my work. 2 is the school district bond debt, which is also technically MOA debt, and that total is $442 million of eligible debt to be defeased. That is also financed between 2 and 4%. The third category is established master lease debt. You regularly get appropriation items before you to put loans onto the master lease. The total available under the current master lease is $100 million. The total on the master lease right now is $49.9 million. Examples of the things that are currently on the master lease range anywhere from the SAP capital expense, which after all of the payments that have been made over the last many years, the general government amount of SAP debt that remains is $35 million, or will be after we make our 2020 payment. Or things that are as small as the Lusac Library circulation desk improvements. Those were taken out through a loan in order to not hurt the budget of the library in a way, and that what remains on that is $358,000. So there's a comprehensive list that we can provide if the body is interested of the things that remain on the master lease and would be there when we close, to determine whether or not you would like to entertain any of those items to be paid off. All of those rates are anywhere between 1.9 and 4.2%, depending on when they're issued, what term, and how much money it is. Any questions? Those are the three major categories of things we can pay off.
So I have in the past argued to take a broader view of what a debt is, and you're telling me that your legal advice is that no, we can't do something like pay off part of a retirement fund that we're required to pay every year. The thing, we don't have that anymore, but the thing that we use COPS to basically refinance, for example.
Through the chair, I think that debt, whether or not something is municipal debt, is a complicated legal question which honestly exceeds my legal expertise. That's why we have outside finance counsel on this. We've talked about it with her. I know that this body, I think, has questioned whether or not we agree with her analysis. I don't always agree with her analysis. In this instance, I do. I think she has gone through for us and determined which things are debt, which things aren't. If there's something specific you have in mind, we could send it to her to talk about it.
So this is her answer. She has said these are the three.
This is our answer collectively. We also explored the idea of paying off the Denina Center, because the Denina Center is a very large debt. It explicitly said in the enabling language of the Denina Center that this is not MOA debt.
Yeah, the Denina Center is not.
So we went down that path for a while before we got to that point.
And a lot of this goes back to municipal debt explicitly under the Alaska Constitution, right? We cannot pledge, it's something we've pledged our full faith and credit to stand behind, which cannot be entered into without a vote of the people, right? And I think there's a little bit of fudge space there where the municipal debt practitioners create things that are not explicitly pledges of full faith and credit to municipality that look like these lease-back transactions. And our comfort level with our council is in treating those as debt. If we take the most strict interpretation of what is debt, it is only things where we have pledged our full faith and credit and received a vote of the people endorsing them pursuant to the Alaska Constitution. I think there is some space in the wiggle room there, and again, our council's agreed with this, to look at things that are debt-like instruments. But it's not carte blanche to say, well, we're going to prepay a lease for 30 years for a building that we live in, or something, or just spend it on whatever else you want to spend it on. But there are debt-like instruments that we have as a municipality that we are sweeping into that category.
Mr. Peterson and Mr. Constant, and then Mr. Weldon, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, if they don't ask my question.
Okay. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would it be possible to get a list under the master lease debt of those that are in the 4.2% range?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. I know there's a whole other half to this conversation, but our debts, what's that?
I said it's the next one.
Yeah, our debts far exceed our means, and so I think there's nothing unreasonable about focusing on those things that are clearly voter authorized, that have pledged the full faith and credit of the municipality, if we're going to go down the path of paying for debt, because let's stay square within the target instead of drifting. And I too would like to see all of these debts with their rates next to them, so that we can pick at them wisely if this is the path we choose to go.
See, I would partly disagree with that by saying I wouldn't focus. To me, it's not about is it clearly an Alaska State Constitution debt. It would be what's the most expensive? What are we paying the highest rates on? Whether it's a debt or a debt-like instrument.
And we're giving you both of those things. Through the chair, if I may, we're giving you both of them. We're giving you debts and debt-like instruments. What we're not giving you is something that is clearly neither. Right. Like I think, I don't know if there are certain things you're interested in, but I've heard a couple suggestions, and we've run them through them with our council that were just way, could we just prepay the lease on a building? No, that's absolutely not neither a debt nor a debt-like instrument. But the list that we've amalgamated with her, like she considers the ability, we're going to look at repaying the MLNP share of the SAP debt, which is not in fact bond debt. It is this debt-like instrument financed through a leaseback transaction. We consider that a debt that we could pay off as part of this. But so if there's something specific you have in mind, I would say we are giving you the broadest possible list of things that I think pass the red face test as a debt. And if there's something specific you'd like me to think about whether or not it's a debt, I'm more than happy to, and I will talk about it with our council and push on her to make sure there's something whether we can consider it. But I think that I just advise you not to clearly step outside the bounds. I think we're giving you the gray area already.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the number crunching approach and the rates. And so where would certificates of participation fall in there according to?
So those are certificates of participation are allowed to be repaid. So for example, we did a COP transaction for all of the fees we had to expend relative to the transaction, and so it's likely that $7.9 million we would recommend that you pay that off. The COP very specifically for the police and fire retirement could be paid off, but it had 10 years of call protection when it got issued, so it would be extraordinarily expensive and not worth it.
But,
just issued that.
But that does raise an interesting issue, right? Because then you could do something like COPS or take out a loan to pay off something like a retirement account. And now that retirement account isn't a debt, but the thing you used, like whether it was COPS or that loan, is a debt now.
So I think that this is where we get into the circumstance of the administration and the assembly needing to determine how much activity you would like to participate in before we actually approve any of these recommendations, because there may be some issues with trying to sandwich this in very quickly to make it debt,
right,
so that we can pay it off.
Sure.
And that would be against the intent of the
I'm sorry, Ms. LaFrance, do you have a follow-up?
Oh, I was just curious as to like when we borrow money from ourselves.
And so the answer is interfund loans are not considered a debt and would not be eligible. So like the National Heritage Property
The National Archives. Okay.
Archives, we very specifically asked that question. We're very specifically told that.
And part of that is because it was purchased with an interfund loan, but is intended to be sold so that that interfund loan is paid off eventually. So I think if there's no specific questions about these 3 points.
I just would add, I would be sorely resistant to the idea of entering into new transactions that would qualify as debt that could then be paid off through this process at this time. I think that would be a really unwise path to tread for us, especially considering we have ample opportunity to pay off anything we might choose to pay off.
Are you going to vote against the bonds?
No, that's not what I'm talking about. What I just heard you say is come up with some creative method to do something and move something to make something qualify, and I would be, that just is terrifying to me from a policy perspective.
So the next piece of the where can the money go puzzle is investment into the MOA trust. So the total amount that's currently in the MOA trust is approximately $165 million. The average return of the MOA trust over the last 3 years has been 6%. The current allowable annual draw of the MOA trust by charter or code?
By code, 650-060 governs how much we can draw from the MOA trust. And I should add as a caveat to this, that number used to be 5%. In the wake of the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, the Assembly passed a change. It's interesting because it's both numbers remain in the code. It's a weird change. It says the average allowable annual draw is 5% of the average asset balance of the trust, and it says, but notwithstanding the foregoing, starting in 2009, it was only 4%. In 2016, this body passed another change that raised it to 4.25%. So that number has moved around. The idea in 2009 was to try and get the corpus of the trust back to a more healthy position. I believe at that point it had dropped down to like $101 million, which was less than its original balance at the time of the ATU sale. And so this is something over which the Assembly has some control. You can revisit the question of how 650-060 is drafted. It has been revisited several times, but this is what it currently says.
So these are the numbers associated over the last 3 and 2020 projection of what the draws from the trust would be with its current balance. So 6.1, 6.3, 6.5, 6.6. Your budget AM includes a deposit of these funds into the trust and spins off an additional approximately $3 million based on the time of the deposit. So most important consideration, I believe, in this whole process is what gets the municipality the most stable and the most longevity out of this transaction. And in financial terms, investing it in the trust is an answer that spins off in perpetuity. And once it's invested, it builds over time. Eventually, 5 years out, you are getting $10 million more if you invest the bulk of the proceeds into the trust than we currently have coming out of the trust right now. The corpus stays protected, it continues to spin, it is a permanent fund.
As an additional caveat to understand why that happens, the average asset balance is a rolling average of the last 20 quarters. So it's not, that's why it increases slowly over time. It's not like it starts at 3 and then moves up to that closer to 10, because it takes a while for that tail for those previous quarters when the money wasn't in the budget, in the trust to move to a point where it's always has money in the trust.
Ms. Quinn-Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the additional $3 million assumes a deposit of how much into the trust?
I think it's under 200. It's under 200. The numbers, we have to run all the numbers again, since when we ran the numbers originally, it was, I don't know, 4 months ago. But the number we expect to increase a little bit.
And so the idea is, we probably spend about $20 million on other debt and then deposit the rest into the trust account.
That's our thought process.
And that depends. The one piece that isn't discussed here, which we'll discuss in greater depth tonight also, is there is some remaining unrestricted cash of the utility. That's something we keep when we sell the utility. That a lot of that right now is again, assuming approval of the settlement agreement is spoken for. A portion of it goes toward this rate reduction fund, which will provide immediate rate relief. Another portion of it is one of the pieces that we contemplate dedicating to expenditure on the treatment center. There will be remaining remaining unrestricted cash. Some of that will need to be used to pay non-debt expenses related to the transaction, specifically the PERS termination study. That's not a debt. That's something that we have to pay for to withdraw those PERS eligible employees from municipal employment. There are these other transaction expenses, the expenses of of attorneys and consultants are just basic transaction costs, and the expense of paying down the SAP balance is something we can pay for out of that unrestricted cash. Some of those things can be paid for out of the actual cash proceeds if they are deemed debt by our council. Some of them can't be, will have to be paid for, and all of that will shake out as we have more information moving toward closing. So there's some fudge space in all these numbers as we move closer to closing.
Can I just ask what the cash reserves are? I guess we're going to talk about that tonight.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, can you put me on the queue too, please?
Yes.
At this point, the unrestricted cash, our estimate is $62 million, and of that 36, it isn't at the end of the day, $36 million of that goes to the rate reserve account, which is the way we've crafted to move forward at the RCA.
Okay.
$15 million of that is what's contemplated to be dedicated to the treatment center, and that leaves $11 million in place there, and then we have an SAP termination, a PERS termination liability, and then we could easily exceed the rest of that with transaction-related expenses if they aren't paid for out of the proceeds themselves. So there is some wiggle room there, certainly, and that's a piece but I think that piece I would encourage you to consider in Q1 budget revisions, because at that point we'll know if the transaction's been approved by the RCA, and we'll know what caveats the RCA could still tinker with that. So I would encourage you not to think too much about the residual unrestricted cash until Q1 budget revisions, when we'll have more certainty about what that looks like.
Mr. Constant, then Ms. Kennedy.
Thanks. Yeah. Back to the slide of the allowable debts. I think the one that we could really take a bite out of is the master lease program. That one is low-hanging fruit, and that gives us more. That's our most flexible form of financing, isn't it? That's like that's our most liquid account. So that's super flexible. And so I am strongly in support of investing as much as we can in the trust. But I look at that pool as a very high probability target that we should be looking at because of the flexibility it provides.
Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I've got it unmuted now. I have a couple of comments, I guess, and then a question. First of all, I'm absolutely interested in seeing what we can do about alleviating some of the debt, particularly with the school bonds. Not having state reimbursement anymore, I think that really burdens the taxpayers significantly, and it's something that we really weren't prepared for. So I think it's going to be worth it to try to figure out how to pay down some of that. I'd also asked the question earlier about whatever else it was that we would still be on the hook for after this sale, and obviously the PERS liability is a big one. So I guess what I'm looking at is a couple different things, and that would be doing a combination of things, paying off some debt and then putting money into the trust to help pay that liability, because from what I've gotten from Mr. Slivka, it looks like we're on the hook for about $1 million a year for the next 20 years. So I'd be interested in actually getting a number of how much money we would specifically have to put into the trust to cover that expense, because that, to a certain extent, really is a long-term debt, and it would be nice to have the money in the trust to be able to pay that on an annual basis. So that's my question. Thank you.
Ms. Browse.
Through the chair to Ms. Kennedy, that's a fantastic question. It's a perfect segue for something I've been waiting to say, which is the Eklutna PPA is paid on an annual basis, and currently we are looking at the Eklutna PPA payments to be the ongoing payment source for the PERS liability on an annual basis. As we get closer to refining all of the numbers associated with PERS liability and what that actually breaks down to on an annual basis, we'll come forward to you with additional information and proposals that would spell all of these things out very explicitly. This is our first major presentation on funds from the ML&P sale, and so I would imagine that there will be many more of these conversations with much larger lists of breakdowns, et cetera, et cetera. So the issues that this body takes away from this conversation and considers, we are absolutely open to you guys coming back with questions, letting us know if there's anything else you would like us to look into as to whether or not it's eligible. But the question that Ms. Kennedy raised is a good one. We have that on our mind as well.
Thank you. Mr. Peters.
Thank you. And can I go on with that one more question, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
And that was just in regards to a timeline. What kind of a timeline are we looking at by when these decisions have to be made?
I think that depends on the body. As of right now, we're still in front of the RCA. The sale is pending. We're not sure when that will be final and money will be changing hands.
I can reach out a little bit.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so timeline of the sale, right now the RCA has taken their statutorily permitted extension and they are required to give us a decision by February 17th. Well, we're in a little bit of limbo with them right now because we have changed, because we filed the stipulation, and so they're shifting their focus to a hearing on the stipulation. We talked yesterday about whether or not they wanted to take further extension of their timeline. They said no, they would like to, they are going to stick with the February 17th, which we like. And so we then have 120 days after whenever the decision is issued to close. Right now, we're looking at whether the end of May makes sense from an accounting perspective of getting all of our ducks in a row to move our utility operations to Chugach by then. But it's still a bit up in the air based on how quickly the RCA acts.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson and then Mr. Dyson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In your email, you mentioned that we had reached a settlement with all the groups that had objected to the sale except for one. And what are the prospects of coming up with a settlement with that?
There's two parties that have not signed on to settlement. One is Homer Electric, who is a relatively minor participant in the proceeding, and they have filed a non-objection to the stipulation, though they have not signed on to the stipulation. The only party that has done nothing yet is RAPA, which is the Ratepayer Advocates section of the AG's office, and their statement thus far is they don't have enough information to determine what they would like to do. So part of our goal over the next 2 or 3 weeks, we're scheduled for another 3 weeks at the RCA, is starting again. We were there yesterday, we'll start again tomorrow, is to recall all of our witnesses in order to provide RAPA with sufficient information to determine how they would like to proceed. So that's and that division of the AG's office, they may not take a position at the end of the day. They have said several times that they'd like to simply make sure that the commission has enough information to make its decision. So they're a slightly different party because they're not they see their goal as different than the other parties to the transaction.
Exactly. What's the list of people who have signed off on it?
The Chugach Electric, Municipal Light and Power, Providence Health and Services, the federal executive agencies representing Joint Base Elmendorf Richardson, Alaska Energy Authority, Matanuska Electric Authority Association, and NSTAR have all signed off on the stipulation.
Great. Mr. Dyson and Mr. Constant, then I think we need to end this hearing.
We'll have more of this at 5.
Oh,
I need to put a vote in the conversation.
Mr. Rivera. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, we have to consider how to say this. So,
Our Assembly Council urges us to do audience participation. We're doing it.
Mr. Dyson.
yeah, so I'm the nag that says let's not use acronyms. But I don't want you to be influenced by me. We got a job to communicate to people. I don't remember a profession that uses acronyms. Our chair here has been immersed in an environment that uses it to the utmost. The question is, why don't you think about the public out here that's trying to understand these documents? I'm fairly good at it. There are 2 or 3 in there I had to jump to try to figure out why they were. Why don't we think about the public out here who is trying to understand? This is very well done. Why write it in code? And the answer is because you're afraid of me nagging about it. What's going wrong with us that we don't think about who's going to use this?
And I think through the Mr. Dyson, your point is well taken. I think the reason it's written in code from time to time is because that's how we think. And it doesn't occur to us that we have to make that clear for people who don't think in code the same way we do. You're exactly right.
Yeah,
Yep.
and the least you do is put the definitions of what it is. And if it's a visual thing where the person can't go to the end of it, then you got to do it to start. And the automatic conclusion when we do this is we don't give a rip what the public thinks or that we communicate with them. That's not the message we want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Let's see, it was Mr. Constant and then Mr. Rivera.
Thank you. So to Ms. Kennedy's question about timeline, there's another timeline at work here, and this is no slight to the administration, but whatever we put in the budget is what happens, and the timeline for the budget is the end of this month. And so we have to make some primary or preliminary decisions before the end of this month on what our plan is. Otherwise, whatever's in the books at the time will flow into action. And so that's the timeline I think we're really working on, is the end of this month.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, then that's a good segue to what I wanted to do, which is to put a bow on all of this conversation that we've had so far. And I'm going to start with the AFD labor budget. And I believe, just based on the conversation, that we do have policy guidance that we're giving to the administration on the AFD labor budget. On homelessness budget, that we may have individual guidance, but as a body, we do not have guidance to give yet. We might have some guidance at first quarter. Then when it comes to the MLNP proceeds, we do want to give guidance, but we need more information, particularly in terms of the debt and what debt we could pay off. And then lastly, on Academy and Vanguard, it sounds like there's a lot of individual guidance, but there isn't a guidance from the body. I do think that that's one that we should give guidance as a body on. So it looks like in a future meeting of Budget and Finance, then we can probably slim down this agenda just to talk about those 2 things, the Academy and Vanguard, MLNP, and then we can continue these discussions in preparation for a budget vote.
Just a quick point of order there. On some of those items, I think it's going to come down to a vote. And so we may not get there in a committee process. And so we can have a robust conversation. But in particular, Academy Vanguard, we have all different interests. And we can't make those decisions here. We have to make them there.
And in terms of the MLP debt, I am convinced, I've been convinced that we have a set of what we can pay. I think what we don't know yet is what we should, what we want to pay. Right. You know, Mr. Slivka, and then I think we really do need to end this meeting.
I'm sure I'm speaking for Ms. McPherson, but we're not going to be able to make any of these decisions until the RCA rules on this. So I understand that we might like to give you an answer by the end of the month, but we'll probably wait until February. None of these numbers are going to change a whole lot. They may move by $1 million or $2 here or there, but until we get RCA approval.
I think it's a different question. I think in the budget we could.
Yeah, I think we can give you a universe, and I don't see you as perhaps. We'll all speak for each other. I think that we could give you a list, a more granular list of what the things are that currently exist that fall into the bucket of debts or debt-like things that you can pay off. And allow you time to consider that and ask questions and think about the budget impacts for different departments if we pay off different sort of line items in that master lease. And that, I think that information will give you in relatively short order for consideration, even though the money is all theoretical until we have approval from the Regulatory Commission.
Should we move on to Eugene?
Yep, we'll have audience participation and we'll end. Thank you, Ms. Pearson. Anyone like to participate? Anyone at all? Mr. Haberly.
My name is Eugene Carl-Haven. I represent myself. I live in Matthew Valley. I follow public process, and the public process unfortunately isn't made by everybody. It's more like the public interest. First, I'd like to know, when did you change, and I like that, what you did. On each issue on the agenda, you allowed for public to comment, homelessness and others. You didn't do it on the municipal light power issue. You left that out. But you did it on the others, and that's a good way. You want to bring in comment, anyone there, and allow them to speak. Second is, I'm going to focus my comments on the last item. I think you kind of suspected that, especially since what's on the agenda for a public hearing tonight. A notice of that one, by the way, was placed for the public yesterday. This was passed out just before you dealt with this item, this light power bill, at this meeting. I see assembly members walking out greatly. Sure. Yep. You already, several have already left before anyone listening to it. But the fact is, this is a complicated issue. It's not easy. You've given some thought to it. I see that. But when you give some thought, you need to connect with the people. And how much chance the public has a chance to say to you what they think, particularly look at the stream of events that happened in the last 24 hours on this item. Now, I assure you that most likely I'll be with you tonight at the assembly where there's a public comment. But the fact is, you had a setup situation where the public has no fair chance. I did address and alerted a community council, Brett Alps, last night that this was happening. I also informed them on the process of public hearings and what's been going on, and that you have at the beginning of the public hearing process the budget hearings for the budget. And I received a strong applause, by the way. Last 4 or 5 community councils, both in both Valley and Anchorage, have been receiving strong applause from the audience. That's a signal that the public does like what I do. But and they're concerned with what you are doing, as well as in the Valley, what they're doing. So I strongly urge you to cease the situation of disconnecting people before you make decisions and connect more appropriately. Because I heard some things tonight, and there'll be limited time for me to address tonight on that 180 seconds. And I say one thing too. I hear the word trust, and that's a word that you have to give trust to somebody, and when you lose that trust, you have to return it. And on the issue of setting up a trust, it sounds like you want to combine the trust of ATU trust. I would encourage you to separate those two ideas and have 2 separate trusts set up if you're going to do a trust. Leaving all the assets into one party could lead to a situation where one party is doing a mistake, whereas 2 more likely at least get one doing it right. Thank you.
Outstanding. We are adjourned.